Hi, I'm Tom Field, Senior Vice President of Editorial with Information Security Media Group. I want to welcome you to our webinar today. The topic, why APTs can be so difficult to find, investigate, and resolve. Your presenters include Michael Morris, Director of Business Development and Technology Alliances with Endace, Martin Crew, Director, Industry Solutions with Gigamon, and Russ Warren, Program Manager with IBM Security. But before I turn this over to them, let me give you a little bit of background on today's session. This panel discussion is going to bring together security industry leaders from IBM, Gigamon, and Endace to discuss effective approaches for quickly discovering APTs and confidently finding unalterable evidence of these complex threats. In this session, you'll learn about the challenges security practitioners face and why APTs can be so difficult to find, investigate, and resolve, best practices and key components necessary to improve your threat resolution time, and finally, how to advance from reactive threat response to proactive threat hunting while getting the most out of your existing tools and infrastructure. And a note, throughout this presentation, our presenters will be opening up some interactive poll questions for you to participate. So look for those throughout the session. I do want to take just a moment to tell you about my organization, Information Security Media Group. We're a global education and intelligence firm. You may know us best by one of our 30-plus international media sites. These include BankInfoSecurity for financial services, GovInfoSecurity for the public sector, and Healthcare InfoSecurity for the medical community. We also publish InfoRisk Today, Data Breach Today, and Careers InfoSecurity. Every one of these sites is dedicated to providing education and news regarding information security, but specifically tailored to their individual sectors. With over 950,000 members registered to our sites, we've created a true information source that tackles the key issues of interest to our unique audience. Just a few notes of housekeeping. If you have any questions for our speakers during the course of this session, you can submit them anytime by the chat window you see on your screen. Also, if anyone should experience technical issues while viewing today's webinar, please dial the number you see now on your screen. If you dial extension 107, we do have technical support staff standing by to help. Also, one more thing I need to emphasize, the content being presented today is copyrighted material. As such, it's meant for today's session and individual study purposes only. If you or your organization would like to use any of the information presented today, or if you're looking for customized training materials, please contact us. Now it's my privilege to introduce our sponsor today, Endace. Endace's Endace Probe analytics platform records a 100% accurate record of network activity while simultaneously hosting third-party network security and performance solutions. This ability to integrate accurate network history into these solutions enables rapid investigation and resolution of network security and performance issues. Endace customers can quickly deploy security and performance tools on the Endace Probe platform and dramatically reduce OpEx and CapEx costs by allowing consolidating multiple solutions onto a common platform. To learn more, please visit endace.com. And now let's meet our speakers today. We're going to begin with Michael Morris. Again, he leads business development and technology alliances at Endace, where he's responsible for building an ecosystem with strategic vendors to provide customers with easy workflows and flexibility to leverage network history platform. You'll hear from Martin Crew. He's Director Industry Solutions at Gigamon, and Martin brings a 30-year background in all aspects of enterprise IT to his role at Gigamon, where he focuses on a number of initiatives and products, including Gigamon's application visibility and intelligence solutions. And of course, you'll hear from Russ Warren, Program Manager for Technology Alliances with IBM Security. He has extensive experience in developing products for the management of systems, networks, applications, business systems, storage, and security, working through the full life cycle of software development, product management, development, test support, and beta programs. With that, let me turn you over to our presenters now. Gentlemen, the show is yours, and I look forward to it.
Thank you, Tom. Hello, everyone. This is Michael Morris, and again, want to welcome you to this session. We really want to dive deep into the intricacies and the challenges we see many SecOps teams facing around advanced persistent threats. And we want to help you go through really 4 key areas. Number 1, understanding the complexity of an APT and the challenges that are being faced around there. We'll talk through some of the damages that can be done to your organization. We'll give you some best tips and practices for countering APTs, and what we believe is a really solid architecture for your security stack to really continually manage and hunt for APT visibility. And finally, we'll wrap up with a real-world investigation where you can see how the power of the right architecture can really differentiate your ability to respond quickly and to isolate issues faster than ever. So first of all, it's key to understand what the key elements are around advanced persistent threats. I'm sure many of the folks on this call are very familiar with the term and with a lot of the malware threats in today's environment. But there's some key attributes that are really imperative to understand around APTs. First is the length of time they tend to dwell in your environment. You know, it can be anywhere from days, weeks, some have even been months and years. And understanding that a single indicator of compromise or an indicator of a threat could just be one part of a much larger chain that's going on and traversing your network to find valuable data, do reconnaissance, and find assets that can make you either vulnerable as an organization or can compromise your brand integrity. And so what we want to walk through is making sure you understand how difficult it is to connect the dots at times and to find the evidence that is often trying to be hidden via wipers and things like that. And so really getting your arms around being able to connect different indicators together is really part of understanding how to start combating and finding advanced persistent threats. So this is where it's key to understand the elements of the APT kill chain, where different phases in the life cycle of the threat. Obviously, it starts with infiltration, whether that's via email or some other infiltration vector. But at different points along this kill chain, there may be indicators of compromise or indicators of attack that may be picked up by various tools and systems within your environment. But it's being able to connect them together to understand really how far and wide something might have compromised your environment, and being able to identify those indicators and make those connections earlier in this kill chain really can minimize the impact of a threat or a breach to your company's infrastructure. Let's give you a specific example though, and this is a little bit older an example. It happened at the end of 2016, the Indestroyer example, but it's really a great illustration of how complex and how many stages of infiltration can actually happen with an APT. So the initial infection occurred by email, or in this case, was a system that was not updated correctly. But once that initial infection had happened, this threat was actually on the system for 3 days before anything happened, or before it was identified by any of the security tools within the environment. But by that point, it had begun to spread, and it opened up a secondary backdoor, and it opened and installed 4 payload components that then went into reconnaissance phase. And these payloads each were searching for different PLC units, RTU controllers throughout an industrial environment. But these literally lived within the environment for weeks and scanning and collecting data on the infrastructure before it finally entered the 3rd phase, where a DOS attack finally affected and compromised controller units. But again, had things been identified earlier and had the connection been made to different indicators along the path, this could have been contained much easier and would have reduced the power outage that ultimately occurred in this instance. So again, this initial virus was existing on the machine for 3 days, but in kind of a post-mortem of the activity, if you went back and looked at the network traces that were infected after the fact, there were many elements, as I mentioned here before, that really could have been indicators had they been connected together. So there were additional downloads of payloads. There were C2 communications to strange external hosts. There was regular beaconing that was happening so that the threat actors could identify, the continuous activity going on within the environment. There was after-hours activities and low and slow communications, which are a very common, very hard to find attribute of APTs nowadays. So data being transferred at low and slow rates to external hosts, it's hard to find. It's hard to know when that's happening when you're in network, because so oftentimes there's large volumes of data, low data, and data hidden and masked in DNS traffic really can be difficult to find. And so that's, again, just some examples of how it's important to understand the different elements of an APT. And the bad news is automated systems and most of your standard tools don't catch all of the elements of an APT, right? So nearly 40% of the advanced threats are missed by traditional security tools. So it's key to have tools that work together that can help you connect those dots. Now's a good time to probably take our first poll question. So assuming you've had an APT, tell us about the time before you were able to fully detect and contain that APT. You can answer the poll question on the right of your screen. So with that, why don't I turn it over to Martin and let him give the details of why APTs are so difficult to detect. Martin?
Yes, Mike, thanks very much, and thanks for inviting Gigamon to be part of today's webinar. So I'm going to move quickly through a few slides here because I think our audience are probably familiar with most of these points. So why are APTs so difficult to detect? Well, the first thing is that, as you guys know better than we do, your security teams are by and large understaffed in the first place and just overwhelmed with the amount of alerts they're trying to deal with. So that's one of the ways APTs can slip under the radar. Secondly, in many cases, the threat actors are working outside of the law. They are not afraid of the consequences that many other threat actors are very mindful of and are subject to. They're very stealthy. These guys are expert. They know exactly what they're doing, and they're patient. So they don't need to see an immediate return on the attack. It's a multi-phase camouflaged attack, and it can stay undiscovered for weeks, months, or maybe even years. They use very advanced intrusion techniques. So multi-stage payloads and polymorphic payloads are very common mechanisms that these guys use. And they attack on multiple attack vectors, often simultaneously. So it's very, very hard to detect these events. Critically, the way to detect them is to get full visibility into the network. Obviously, you do not have visibility into what's happening before these threats emerge on the network. But as soon as they emerge, having that visibility is absolutely critical to uncovering, connecting the various events that relate to an APT, and then building the evidence that's defining the attack. So you've probably seen many of the high-profile APTs that have happened over the last few months. Sony is probably the one that's most on people's, or not most on people's minds, but very mindful for many folks. It dwelt within the network for 12 months and siphoned off eventually 100 terabytes of data. But it's just one example. So I'm going to hand over now to Russ, and he's going to take us through the next portion of our webinar. Russ, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Martin, for setting the stage, as well as Michael. I mean, you can see here from our previous discussion here that we have a lot of challenges trying to deal with these advanced persistent threats. And another thing that I'll observe that we can add to that is the fact that there's really no single tool that's going to say we've got a great understanding of your environment, we have all this information, and we can single-handedly find these sophisticated attackers that that Martin was talking about. It's sophisticated attackers. There's a lot of information that they are gleaning from our systems. How the heck do we get our hands around this? Well, some of the things to think about is, well, what are we going to use to counter these advanced persistent threats? Well, as Michael mentioned, IOCs, indicators of compromise, are going to be very important because they're going to give us an understanding of places where we have risks in our networks that it look like we may have some exposure from a security point of view. Packet data that Michael was talking about as well is extremely important because that gives us some footprints that we can go look at to see what has actually happened in our network. So if we do find there is an intrusion, we can now understand what that intrusion was doing and what kind of effect it had to our systems. Threat defense is really going to tightly integrate this packet data, the network data that Martin was talking about, as well as other information from network equipment, endpoints, as well as other places in the network where we do have visibility. And all that visibility is key to understanding the overall environment and where these advanced persistent threats may be hiding. So we like to look at this in terms of threat hunting as a loop of things that you're going to do as you're trying to investigate some suspicious activity that you're not sure, A, how much impact it has to your business, and B, what it is doing and where it is at this point. So you really want to start looking at some ideas of, let me look around, let me look at information and understand what's going on. Let me understand if any of those are aligned with already known suspicious actions, which us in the security industry like to call TTPs, right? So we're looking for known threats. We're looking for tactics and techniques that have been used before. And that helps us understand that we have a pattern that is definitely suspicious and we ought to do something about. There's the very famous in the industry MITRE attack framework that people use, that we use in our products. And that is a great example of the knowledge that's been captured to date of how to find these adversarials that Martin was talking about and what kind of techniques they're using. And that kind of knowledge is a wonderful shared knowledge that we can use as patterns to see what's happening in your network and line that up with some of the behaviors you may be seeing. So one of the things that's very interesting about all of this is while we have vast amounts of security events, the problem is they're occurring at such a high rate across the network. And when we say network, we're talking about things like firewalls and IDSSs and gateways and so forth, and also on the endpoints. And all that information is streaming in at a very rapid pace, especially since you have a lot of endpoints and a lot of information flowing across your networks. Some of it obviously are mobile systems, some of it is at-home systems, some of it is systems that are attached to your internal networks. So getting that information visibility is extremely important. But to build on that, what you want to do is be able to correlate that across the spectrum I just described in order for us to see some patterns that are emerging and to get a better understanding of what is happening to our resources. Once you get that clearer picture of these threats, then you can take some more information and enrich that data and understand what is happening in those particular areas that you do see some consistent indicators that we have a problem. And we can use those tools then to correlate information across those visibility points to align the security data that these products have and have a better understanding and clearer understanding of the context of this particular attack, where it's possibly affecting us, and how much risk it is to our business and what is being exposed. That'll drive our Security Operations Center priorities to dispatch, investigation, and repair of these particular issues. So one of the fundamentals we have of the threat hunting model is to take that detailed information and integrate it across the environments. And some of the integration that we have here is getting the right data at the right place. And a lot of the information that we have today is very raw information. For example, if someone logs onto a system, you could get 10 to 15 events for that single logon. But there is intelligence into our products today, and we're going to talk a little about that later in the discussion, where instead of getting every single piece of information that could possibly be going on, it would be great if products could add some value to that in terms of analyzing that information and coming up with summaries and intelligence and exceptions to the normal behavior. So it makes it even clearer that we have a threat and we understand that there may be something we want to mitigate. And so cutting down those raw events and sharing that information together gives us the ability to pivot much more quickly by eliminating a lot of the noise for the too much detail, if you will, events, and also pointing us in the right direction of where we can see problem areas. And a lot of that is not only, seeing the information, but in many cases, like in the case of the networks, you have, encrypted data. And we want to see inside of that as well to ensure that we're seeing everything we need to see if there is a problem in our systems. So what I have here on the screen now is our 4 pillars of threat management. And this is a way we organize our thoughts in terms of what are we looking at in terms of the data we're collecting, and what do we do with it in terms of understanding how to detect these threats that we were talking about previously. So on the left-hand side, the first thing you see here is the telemetry. And this is the set of data, and it's not all the data the Security Operations Center will see, but this is the key data when we're talking about network security. And as you can see that long list of information there, that there's a lot of significant telemetry, and these are most of the time collected by multiple different products that are very important for us to see so that we can understand what is happening in environments. So when you go beyond looking at the telemetry, what you're trying to figure out is, where do I see some issues with what data is coming through the environment, and how do I then take actions based on that information? So that visibility is extremely important, where we can take that information, correlate it, suppress multiple events so we see the single event that's relevant, and organize it in such a way that we understand where we see we've got threats against our systems, and we have information that tell us where those threats are and what we want to do with them. Once we've got that visibility, now we can apply what we discussed before in terms of analytics and automation to help the operations team take the significant amount of data and bring it and correlate it down to the significance of that data. And I'm going to show you examples later on in the presentations of how automation can help us zero in on information and provide the operations center with very important, relevant information around the events that we're seeing in this network. And again, it goes back to the discussion we had on the relevant patterns for the attacks, the MITRE attacks. That information is extremely relevant for an operations person to know that we've seen certain patterns that we know are from risky areas. And the other thing that's key to see is that all that threat telemetry coming in on the left is not only feeding network information, but it's correlating with things like IOC information, correlating with things like user behavior information on endpoints. And as you start seeing the bigger picture, not only do you see network information telling you we have a problem, but then the user information that the user's using will also give us even more significant visibility to what is going on in that network. Then once we've got that information, we prioritize it based on our business risk and say, now that we understand we've got a significant attack on resources that we really want to protect, let's go ahead and get the incident response teams and the operations teams to take a look in more detail and more context around that information. And this is where you can take that information and then start looking across the tool set that you have, enabling you to look deeper into the information that these tools have to create the overall context of what the problem is and what kind of risk we're associated with this. And then the response of this can then say, now that we know what we've got, we've done the investigation and we've seen where the problem is, we know how to repair it, and we've seen where the impact is, so because there may be residual impact, for example, as discussed previously, lateral attacks or malware being placed certain places. We're going to want to respond to not only fix the impact of the exposure, but also clean up and repair those things that have been damaged by the particular advanced persistent threat. So when I look at the 4 pillars and we go to the next step and say, how do we now think about the product set that we're talking about here, and how do they help with all that stuff? It's great that now we have a big broad picture of an advanced persistent threat, what it means and what kind of information, but how can we now do something about it? And here's where it's very important that we overlay what we're doing here as we integrated our products together. And as the first thing we're doing is, as we discussed previously, network traffic is significant. There is a lot of information coming across the network. And that information, while raw, is a lot. And it's high volumes, and it's really difficult to decipher if all you're doing is dealing with the raw data. But what Gigamon has provided is more of an enterprise-wide look at this data, and including providing metadata around that information. And what you're going to see when we show you the example is That information, again, gives a clearer picture to the security operations center administrator, because they're no longer looking at raw information, but more enterprise-wide focused information that points out problems much more clearly, eliminating all that noise and pointing us in a direction of where in the network we see that we've got some advanced persistent threat activity happening, and what about that data that we can collect around that data so we can then do some investigation. Now, once we have that together, we can then pull that in with the information we have for the detect phase, and this is where our IBM QRadar SIM is getting that information from Gigamon and pulling that together with all the other information in the telemetry I've talked about previously between firewalls, gateways, and endpoints, and providing the correlation to take that information and bring it together with others to, again, provide a much more visible activity report on what's going on with these threats and what they are impacting. So the correlation of that information across that spectrum of network data, endpoint data, QRadar also provides the ability for IBM export threat intelligence data to come in. So we're looking at IOCs and the latest vulnerabilities that have been reported on emerging threats. And we tie that together with the information we got at Gigamon. And that gives us, as you can tell, a very broad understanding of what is happening overall in your IT network and where we may see suspicious information. But no longer in an independent product by product view, but more of a correlated, integrated view that enables us to see that clearly. And in some of the outages that Michael and Martin were talking about, you can look at some of those examples they talked about, and I'll guarantee you in every one of those examples, there were tools in those customer environments that were firing off, we have security event information, but they weren't visible enough. They weren't relevant enough for the operations team to follow up on until it was late. And the later you go, the more exposure and the more problems that you're going to have. Once we've got the detection, we can then investigate the security event, prioritize now based on what we've seen across the spectrum, and be able to drill into information, get more context. And this is where the Endace probe comes in, where if we do see something suspicious and some traffic happening, the network is indicated it is coming from a bad actor or is coming with some very interesting risky type of behaviors, we can then probe into the Endace probes to take a look at the actual packets down at that layer. And again, the great thing about that context is we went from a high-level view of we do see a network issue down to a very detailed view of we now can actually look at the exact packets that particular network has exchanged, and we can look inside them to see what has happened. And then finally, we can respond to that and resolve the information of, now that we've seen what's going on, how do we mitigate and repair the damage that has been caused by this IOC. So now I'll turn it over to Martin. He'll talk to us about how the Gigamon information feeds into this overall information.
Great, thanks, Russ. So a couple of quick slides from me just to help everybody understand how these three components, Gigamon, IBM, and Endace, fit together. So Gigamon provides a visibility and analytics fabric. So we tap into all the data sources on your network, whether it's physical, virtual, or cloud-based. We're then able to consolidate all of that information together, normalize it, and then distribute it out to the various tools that need it. So in this case, to IBM's QRadar and to Endace. So let me just highlight two things we're going to talk about. So in the context of the security realm, there's really two things that are critical here. First is that we see all of the data on the network. So the SSL decryption circle is critical here. As we know, one of the big issues in enterprises these days is a lot of attacks come through encrypted data. So organizations have got to figure out ways to reduce the gap between the amount of encrypted data on the network and the amount they're actually decrypting and inspecting. So that's one of the capabilities that we have that comes into play here. The second is that we have metadata capability. So we have a product called Application Intelligence, and this understands the digital signatures of 3,400 different applications. So we can identify those applications, we can filter traffic from them, and we can delve underneath the obvious surface level to see the metadata underlying the applications and understand the interaction of those applications with the network. So in the context of this solution, What we're feeding to the IBM QRadar SIM is NetFlow and metadata. So we don't need to send all of the network traffic there. We just send the traffic that's relevant. So we're not swamping the tool with irrelevant or duplicate data. So that's one of the two feeds that we have. The second feed into the Endace system is it does need to see the full data captured packet. So we send all of the packet data to Endace, and then it shares it with the various analytic tools that are hosting there. So a little bit more about how we work with QRadar. So as we saw earlier on, when you are threat hunting for these advanced persistent threats, there's a very, very wide range of data that you need to have visibility into, be able to understand, and then decide what to do with. It's clearly not viable to take all of the network information and pass it on to all the tools that could potentially use it. So what we do is we extract, we index, and we display all of the network information and decide based on that what actually needs to be sent to the QRadar system. So again, we're correlating all the information that's coming in, we're looking for context, and based on the context, we're sending the metadata about that to QRadar. So whether it's about applications, whether it's about website URLs, whether it's return codes, or whether it's suspicious DNS activity, all of that information is sifted through and only the relevant information sent to QRadar. So for our second poll question, we're asking a very simple yes or no question. Have you seen an increase in APT attacks since the COVID-19 pandemic? Yes or no, please. So with that, Russ, I think I'm back to you to talk more about how you accelerate those insights.
Yes, Martin, thank you so much. So as Martin was talking about, you can see that very specifically how the network data got filtered into the QRadar system to provide what is relevant for what it needs to do to find out where we may have some possible incidents that we need to go look into. The other interesting aspect of what's happening as we've correlated all this information in a central place is independent of that, we have a couple of other applications running on QRadar, and they're looking at it from two completely different visibility points of view. And one of them is called the QRadar User Behavior Analytics. Now, what it does is it's really designed to detect insider threats in your organization. But as we all know, at a lot of APTs, you know, the insider is hijacked, or the insider is all of a sudden become taken over, or their credentials are being used. So while it may look like an insider, it's actually, you know, the insider is being spoofed. So how do we find that is the ability for the user behavior analytics to look at a particular user, understand how they're getting their information on a daily basis, and point out anomalies. Again, we're always looking for anomalies. We're always looking for things that are unusual that we want the operations team to look at. So what the QRadar User Behavior Analytics application is doing is looking around the users, and it's adding risk profiling and unified user identities into the environment. And when I say unified user identities, as you all know, as well as I know, we all have multiple identities, right? From Google identities to your own corporate identities and so forth. And you want to be able to pull that all together. So, because if somebody's being attacked, you know, their identities may be compromised, and you want to know what's happening across their complete identity space. So risk profiling is done by assigning a risk to different types of use cases. Examples might include simple rules and checklists for bad websites. There could be things that are used for machine learning to look at how things are behaving. In other words, a user is acting like he's requesting information from a place he shouldn't be at a weird time, or he's asking for information from multiple time zones in a matter of seconds. Those kind of anomalies are obviously something's not right, and you want to get that pointed out quickly. So you're looking for that stateful information so that you can understand that a user's actions are enabling us to see that we've got something unusual. And the Gigamon information that Martin talked about is actually feeding this tool as well, because we're correlating that network information along with the end user information to find out if our users are starting to act unusually. And so that traffic is extremely important, as well as any authentication traffic we see and any account changes we see from any LDAP type services. So you can see, you know, the power of taking the network data from from Gigamon and then adding it to the profiling, the authentication, and the information we're getting on the users themselves, again, more clearly states if we have a threat against a particular user, that user is definitely, having an unusual behavior and acting in a strange way, so that we want to take a more detailed look at it. The other application you see on the right-hand side is the Curator Advisor Watson. This is the AI section that we want to talk about here. What we're doing with artificial intelligence here is it's taking a lot of the raw data Curator has and bringing it together to understand if there's anything about that data that may uncover hidden threats and help users understand what the risks are and the triage are. And we talked about that before, the threats that we see and the patterns that we see. So as you can see, it did support the MITRE attack framework. And so what we're looking at here is taking that information, mapping it against the attack framework, and that is all happening automated in the background. So the Security Operations Center user, i.e. the Curator user, isn't doing this by hand. This is automatically happening, and an analysis will be presented back to the operator saying, you may be looking at these integrated compromise. First of all, we'll tell you even more about what the IOC is, what its history has been, what its attack pattern has been, and as well as what we can do to mitigate that action. And all that can come back so that the user not only sees, oh, look, I have found some IOCs, but there are places that this thing has extended to or communicated with that I did not see, but now I do see because the automation has correlated that information together. So you can see that significantly reduces the time of hunting that we found. We found a specific problem, but where exactly in the network has it hit? Here we can see that the automation has helped us saying we have a number of different areas that this thing has hit and a number of suspicious other connections that this has made that we want to investigate. So now I have a much clearer picture, much more quickly on what to go look for and how to understand how to mitigate this information. So those are all running in parallel with the information that's coming in from our Gigamon and Endace connections. Now, if you look at it from the operations point of view on this slide here, what you see on the left side is a Curator dashboard where there's a number of different elements of that dashboard. And one of them is obviously looking at offenses, which are a summary of the set of events that tell us that we've got certain security issues. And you can see with the color coding, the prioritization that's done on them, again, to filter and organize and prioritize so that we get the most important events at the top, the ones that expose the business the most. And so you see that kind of in the middle of the screen. And then there's a lot of detailed analysis around access points, about countries, about timing of when things have happened that you see in some of those widgets on that screen. And the nice thing about this is now that we've got the Gigamon data coming into Curator, and we do want to look at something that looks like it may have been compromised, we can very simply do a right click on a particular offense and drill right into the Endace probe for that particular IP address and understand what it is recorded over a period of time that we can obviously play back and look at history to see, given that suspicious behavior, let's take a look at what's affected this particular resource and what kind of network traffic we have seen in the history from the Endace probes. So that's very valuable to link from I see a particular problem to I want to look into more detail on what that particular problem may have affected in terms of some of our resources. So you can see we've got a Gigamon, Curator, and Endace all on this screen that basically are working together to put that data in front of the operations center as quickly as possible so we can get from the detection to the responsive mitigation as quickly as we can. So if we look to summarize a little bit about what those particular elements have done, you see that on the Gigamon side, we've got network-wide visibility, as Martin was talking about, decrypting traffic so it makes it visible, so we can see, and criminals cannot hide under, encrypted soft layers. We need to see underneath that to see what they're doing. We do get the filtering, so we get the effectiveness of just reporting on what needs to be reported. And that all is coming into the IBM Security QRadar system, where we've got threat intelligence feeds, network feeds, the automation I talked about, the artificial intelligence from the Watson integration that we have, as well as the user behavior application to quickly detect and understand where we need to focus on mitigating and fixing and remediating any breaches that may have occurred from the advanced persistent threat. And then the Endace probe giving us the ability to drill into the packets to understand what has happened, what kind of effect has been done from the APT that we found, and allow us to then take the right responsive actions to this particular threat. So the next section here, what we're going to do here is going into an example. As we described at the beginning, we really want to take an example of a rogue DNS in this case, right? And there are many different types of DNS attacks. There's DNS hijacking, DNS poisoning, DNS redirections. We use subverting DNS systems, right? And DNS systems are used constantly by our systems in order to take IP addresses and resolve them. And that's a wonderful attack point for a lot of different malware and a lot of different persistent threats. And what we want to do is figure out how do we find these things and how do we discover whether we've got a trusted DNS server that's been compromised. So let's take a look for a minute at what that's going to engage. Taking a look at our tools, and as an example of, how do we deal with this? Because now we've got something going on in our networks and it's not right. Now, how are we going to recognize that? Well, one of the things one of the things we have is Incubator has an application called the DNS Threat Analyzer. And what it is doing is taking very specific information and looking at visibility, let's think of it at the DNS layer. The DNS layer, as we discussed, is critical to network operations, but we do see a lot of threats that are using that DNS network traffic as a perfect way of putting in very suspicious and very dangerous network flow. That if you start looking at it saying, what is this traffic doing on the DNS line? It should be somewhere else. It doesn't look right. So you see malicious traffic at this layer because that layer is active, so it's a great attack point. So you want to look at it, and the analyzer is just looking at that specific area, looking for any suspicious behavior of connections that we haven't seen before, user behaviors that we haven't seen before, the modifications that may have happened to the environment. And those things are going to help us, again, identify and detect that we've got a rogue DNS threat happening here. So that information, the feeds coming in from the Gigamon networking probe, is going to enable us to then take the next look at what a spoof DNS server looks like. Now, at the logical layer, you see in this chart here that talks about what's happening here exactly. Well, the attacker is going into a nice valid DNS server and injecting a fake entry. And that fake entry is going to redirect the normal everyday user that you have on your system to start going to a website they don't even know is incorrect. And these fake websites are very good, and it's hard sometimes to recognize that they're fake. But once you've got to that fake website, you can see on the right side what's going to happen, right? That's the opportunity to introduce malware. That's the opportunity to start building command control capabilities. That's the opportunity to exfiltrate personal user data like account passwords and user logins from the user, because that user thinks he's working on that real website, or in fact he isn't. And that injection that was made into the DNS is redirected them and transparently to them to this website. So that unfortunately is the attack point. So as I described previously, with Gigamon looking at the network traffic, they're going to start seeing suspicious traffic. Why is this user going to this IP address and this fake website up there on the red? That's unusual. You're going to start seeing that information. We're going to see information from the application I described previously of that injection, the DNS entry fake injection showing up as an unnatural thing that would happen to a DNS server. So those things are now we're starting to see some indicators, and that therefore create some visibility into what's going wrong and the fact that we do have an APT actively attacking our IT network. So the first step that the curator operator is going to do is starting to see these offenses, as we said. It just says, hey, we've got an offense here that says we've seen some suspicious DNS activity here. Now, if you look to the right, you'll see a whole bunch of information about, some DNS packets don't look right. There's some DNS flows that aren't happening correctly. There's some IP addresses on the other side that we haven't seen before. So the stuff on the right start to saying, hey, we've got a network issue here. It looks like we've been attacked at the DNS layer. And now we've got to go to, take a closer look at the information to find out if we've got an issue. And as we talked about before, that threat hunting loop we talked about, we're doing some, more detailed investigations. Okay, and now for our third poll questions. It's a yes or no question, which you can answer on the right side of your screen. Do you have the right tools to hunt and respond to APTs? Yes or no? So I'll turn it over so you can take a look at the next step of what happens.
Yeah, thanks, Russ. And as an analyst who's trying to drill down, it's imperative, right? They've got all this information at their fingertips now. And while they've been looking at a lot of flow information, higher level abstract information, the value that packet data really provides the analyzer of this incident is the raw forensics of everything, right? Whether it be the payload itself, really understanding the exfiltration of data. So as they drill down from QRadar, they can then begin to expand and really widen their search. They can look at the traffic types, really understanding if there's initiators of different connections based upon the initial DNS transaction. They can expand and zoom their filters, look at directionless flow of traffic so that they can look, are there other hosts within the environment making similar types of connections to that similar unknown host? And so really giving them the power and the flexibility and the data at their fingertips to really understand how far and how wide and exactly what's happening on their network. So once they've identified the specific packets of interest, then the analyzer can literally open it right directly on the Endace probe and look in Wireshark at the raw traffic. And that way they can see those payload data. And again, that's where raw full packet data will really differentiate from metadata, to be able to see what data files were exfiltrated, right? What was in those files? Was there sensitive information? And again, helping them quickly get to the end root of the problem and solve how far and how wide the situation went. So back to our diagram, the quicker we've identified this fake DNS site, and then the fact that we've been able to drill down to the relevant packet data, identify if there was any other host connecting to this external host, if there was any exfiltrated data, we've now in literally minutes of time been able to break this chain real fast and contain this APT. So the complexity that we've talked about this whole time has really been simplified by the power of bringing Gigamon data to QRadar and to Endace and letting an analyst break that chain as quick as possible. So in conclusion, what we believe and what we're hoping you come away from this session with is really deploying tools that share data and help you connect those dots in the complexity of an APT. It's hard to track them. It's hard to have visibility across your whole network. And it's hard to speed those incident response unless you have a setup and an environment that really allows you to accurately and conclusively get to the root cause of an investigation. And so what we believe our approach and our recommendation does is really enables your SecOps team to move from that reactive, just trying to stay ahead of the alarm floods, to really a more proactive threat hunting approach, because they can quickly dispense alarms and get through incidents that much faster. And in summary, to take away, we highly recommend you embrace solutions that are best in breed, that are open, that allow you to connect your workflows, that allow you to connect tools you've got in your environment quicker, enables you and empowers you to speed your resolution time, limit your damage and your exposure from a threat environment that is affecting you, and ultimately help you find APTs and connect the dots of indicators along the way. So enabling you to leverage all that data across your environment with the right tools and the right teams faster. So with that, Tom, I'll turn it back to you for questions.
Well, very good, gentlemen. I appreciate your time and your presentation today. As you say, we have the opportunity to take some questions now. Some have been submitted, but for others, you still have the opportunity to submit questions by the chat window on your screen. Those that we can't answer in the course of this session, we will get responses back to you via email. So, gentlemen, some questions that have come in. First one I have, does this solution work across all of my physical, virtual, and cloud environments?
Why don't I jump into that one, Tom, since Gigamon's kind of on the front end of collecting the data here. So the answer is yes. So Gigamon has taps and virtual taps that will work across any physical, virtual, or cloud environments. And once you've actually got access to that information, passing it on to IBM and Endace is automatic, regardless of the environments that they're hosted in. So very positive yes to that question.
Thank you, Martin. Next question I have for the group. How can I get more information and obtain the integrations for Gigamon, Endace, as well as the QRadar applications you referred to in this webinar? And follow up, are there other such capabilities?
This is Russ from IBM. I'll take that question. So thanks for that question. You can visit our IBM Security App Exchange at https://exchange.xforce.ibmcloud.com/hub to see hundreds of integration solutions for IBM security products, including the Gigamon and Endace solutions we discussed on this call.
And I have got a packed question for you here. Question is, isn't it difficult to find evidence of a breach when you're dealing with such large volumes of network traffic? So how does this make it simpler for me to do my job as a security analyst? And do I need to become a packet expert?
I'll take that question, Tom. Now that's a great question. And part of the value of this integrated approach that we're talking about is really to simplify that whole process. So one of Endace's big differentiators is to do an enterprise-wide search really fast. We can find all related traffic to a single IP address across your entire network, which could be petabytes of network traffic, in under 30 seconds. And we want to present that to you in the context of the workflows you're already working from. So from QRadar or from other tools in your environment, being able to get to the relevant network traffic and the time that it's happening, just before and just after a given indicator or an event, is key. So that's where we're really saving you time, giving you the relevant data in context and presenting it to you in the systems and the tools you're already using. And that ultimately means, no, you don't have to be a packet expert to really identify the details of a threat, because you're drilling down so quickly in context from an indicator of whether it's, and in this case we talked about, is a good highlight. Once you're able to focus on the DNS traffic, now you'll have a PCAT with all the related traffic around that DNS instance, and you can just filter on the DNS traffic, and you've got the data right at your fingertips. So I'm not requiring you to be a Wireshark expert to be able to find everything in itself, because we've zoomed that search so fast for you to narrow in on the relevant data. Really is a game changer for SecOps teams.
Well, very good, Mike. I want to thank you, Russ and Martin, each for your time, for your presentation today. Grateful for your insights as well as for answering these questions at the end. So thank you so much, each of you. And of course, I want to thank our attendees. You took time out of your day to attend this session. We're grateful for that. I do trust that today's discussion provided valuable new insight to help you and your organization be even better prepared to tackle the security challenges we discussed here today. I look forward to seeing you again at one of our upcoming sessions. Until then, for Information Security Media Group, I'm Tom Field. Thank you so much.